The $20 fine sitting on my kitchen counter should have been laughable, but it represented something much bigger than the crisp bill I owed the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. I stared at the violation notice that accompanied it, my coffee growing cold in my hand as I read the words for the 5th time that morning. Violation of Section 12.4. Tire tracks left in snow on driveway create visual blight and diminish neighborhood aesthetic standards. My name is Frank Quinlan, and I had just moved to this planned community outside Boulder, Colorado 6 months ago, thinking I had found the perfect place to settle down after my divorce. The mountains were gorgeous. The neighbors seemed friendly enough at first, and the house was exactly what I needed to start fresh. What I did not realize was that Patricia Henshaw, the HOA president, had turned our little neighborhood into her personal kingdom where she ruled with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive letters and ridiculous fines. I looked out my window at my driveway. Snow had fallen 2 days ago, about 4 inches of the light, fluffy stuff Colorado is known for. I had driven to work the next morning, and yes, my tires had left tracks in the snow. Because that is what tires do. That is how physics works. But apparently, in Meadowbrook Heights, the laws of physics took a backseat to Patricia's vision of a pristine, magazine-ready neighborhood where even snow had to remain picture-perfect. I grabbed my phone and called my buddy Derek, who had warned me about HOAs before I bought the place. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Let me guess," Derek said. "Patricia struck again. $20 for tire tracks in snow," I said, pacing my kitchen. "Tire tracks, Derek, from my car that I drove on my own driveway. Did you try to explain that snow melts?" The violation notice specifically states that I should have smoothed the tracks with a rake or broom to maintain visual standards. Derek was quiet for a moment, then burst out laughing. "She wants you to rake snow, apparently. And this is the 3rd ridiculous fine this month. First, it was leaving my trash cans visible from the street for 45 minutes past pickup time. Then it was having a holiday wreath that was 2 inches larger than the approved diameter. Now this. "You going to pay it?" I looked at the notice again, my jaw clenching. Something inside me snapped. I had been reasonable. I had been accommodating. I had paid the other fines without complaint, hoping to keep the peace. But this was beyond absurd. "I am going to pay it," I said slowly. "But I am also going to make sure Patricia Henshaw regrets ever sending me this violation." "Oh boy, what are you planning?" "She wants smooth driveways. I will give her the smoothest driveways she has ever seen." The idea had come to me the moment Derek mentioned raking. If Patricia wanted pristine snow surfaces, I was going to deliver them. Not just on my driveway, but on every driveway in the neighborhood. And I was going to use the one machine specifically designed to create perfectly smooth ice surfaces. I was going to hire a Zamboni. The next morning, I started making calls. Finding a Zamboni for hire was not as straightforward as renting a moving truck, but Colorado has plenty of ice rinks, and where there are ice rinks, there are Zambonis. After about a dozen calls, I finally reached a guy named Scott who managed the Riverside Ice Arena in Denver. "You want to rent our Zamboni?" Scott sounded confused. "For what?" "Snow removal." "Well, snow smoothing, technically. On ice, on driveways." There was a long pause. "That is not really what they are designed for." "But will it work?" "I mean, yeah, probably. It will pack down snow and smooth it out, but I cannot just rent you our arena's machine." "What if I paid you to operate it?" I asked. "I need someone who knows what they are doing anyway." "1 day's work. I will pay whatever your day rate is plus a bonus." I could practically hear Scott's interest perk up. "How much of a bonus?" $500. "Cash." "When do you need this done?" "Thursday night. We are supposed to get another 3 inches Wednesday night." I want to hit every driveway on my street Thursday morning before people leave for work. Scott laughed. This is for an HOA thing, is not it? Is it that obvious? Man, I have heard stories. Okay, you know what, I am in. This sounds too entertaining to pass up. But if we damage any property, that is on you. Deal. We worked out the details. Scott would bring the Zamboni on a trailer Thursday evening. We would wait until after midnight when the neighborhood was asleep, and then we would systematically smooth every single driveway on Maple Ridge Drive, the street where I lived. 17 houses total, including mine. By the time everyone woke up Friday morning, they would have pristine, glass-smooth driveways that would have made an Olympic ice rink jealous. I spent the next few days preparing. I measured every driveway, noting any obstacles like basketball hoops or decorative rocks that might be buried under snow. I checked the weather forecast obsessively. Wednesday night's snowfall came right on schedule, dumping about 4 inches of fresh powder across the neighborhood. Perfect. Thursday at work dragged by. I teach high school mathematics, and I had never been less focused on quadratic equations in my life. My students definitely noticed. "Mr. Quinlan, are you okay?" asked Jenny Martinez, one of my junior students, after I had zoned out mid-explanation for the 3rd time. "Just have something important planned for tonight," I said, trying to refocus. "Hot date," called out Tyler from the back row, earning laughs from the class. "Something like that," I replied with a grin. When the final bell rang, I practically sprinted to my car. I stopped by the bank and withdrew $500 in cash, then headed home to wait for Scott. I ordered pizza for dinner, too anxious to cook. Every time I looked out the window at the fresh snow blanketing the neighborhood, I felt a surge of anticipation mixed with slight nervousness. Was this crazy? Absolutely. Was it petty? Probably. Was I going to do it anyway, without question? Scott arrived at 11:30, pulling up in a truck with a trailer carrying the most beautiful Zamboni I had ever seen. It was a Model 500, painted blue and white, with the Riverside Ice Arena logo on the side. Scott hopped out, a stocky guy in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and the kind of perpetual smile that suggested he found life generally amusing. "Frank?" he asked, extending his hand. "That is me. Thanks for doing this. Are you kidding?" "This is the most interesting thing I have done in years. My wife thinks I am nuts, but she also said to get pictures." He looked around at the quiet suburban street, houses dark except for the occasional porch light. "So what is the story here? What did the HOA do to deserve the Zamboni treatment?" I showed him the violation notice. Scott read it, his eyebrows climbing higher with each word. "They fine you for tire tracks. In snow, $20. That is insane." He folded the paper and handed it back. "Okay, I am officially invested in this now. Let's make these driveways so smooth they could host a curling tournament." We waited until 12:30, making sure no one was awake or moving around. Then Scott unloaded the Zamboni, the machine rumbling to life with a deep, powerful sound that was surprisingly loud in the quiet night. I winced, but Scott assured me that once we got moving, it would be less noticeable than I thought. "The machine is actually pretty efficient," he explained as he climbed into the driver's seat. "We will start at the far end of the street and work our way back. You walk ahead and make sure there are no obstacles I need to avoid." The first driveway belonged to the Carters, a retired couple who had always been friendly to me. Their driveway was a standard 2-car width, about 30 feet long. Scott lined up the Zamboni and began his work. It was mesmerizing. The machine moved forward slowly, its blade and conditioning system transforming the lumpy, track-covered snow into a surface so smooth it gleamed under the streetlights. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a mess of footprints, tire tracks, and uneven snow became a flawless white plane that looked almost liquid in its smoothness. "Wow," I breathed. Scott grinned from the driver's seat. "Told you, this baby makes everything pretty." We moved to the next house, then the next. The Zamboni did its work with mechanical precision, and Scott proved to be an artist with the controls. He navigated around mailbox posts, decorative stones, and even a buried garden gnome that I almost missed. Each driveway took about 5 minutes, and by the time we were halfway down the street, I was practically giddy with the absurdity and success of the operation. Then lights flicked on at the Morrison house. "Someone's up," Scott hissed, pausing the Zamboni. I watched as a figure appeared at the window, then disappeared. My heart hammered. Were we about to get caught? Was this going to backfire spectacularly? The front door opened and James Morrison stepped out in his bathrobe and slippers. He was a lawyer, late 50s, someone I had only spoken to a few times. I braced myself for anger. Instead, James started laughing. "Is that a Zamboni?" he called out, keeping his voice low but unable to contain his amusement. Yes," I replied. James walked down his driveway, which we had not reached yet, and came over to where Scott sat idling the machine. "Let me guess. Patricia's tire track policy? How did you know?" "Because she fined me last year for the same thing. Cost me $20 and an hour of my life I will never get back, arguing with her." He looked at the Zamboni, then at the perfectly smooth driveways behind us, and his grin widened. "This is the best thing I have seen in months. Can you do mine?" "That is the plan," I said. "Outstanding. Hang on." James jogged back to his house and emerged a minute later with his phone. "I am recording this. Patricia needs to see it." With James as our audience, Scott tackled the Morrison driveway with extra flair, making the surface so immaculate it could have been featured in a winter sports magazine. James applauded when it was done. "You are a hero, Frank," he said, shaking my hand. "An absolute hero." We continued down the street. 2 more neighbors came out to investigate the noise, and both reacted with similar delight. The Petersons even brought out thermoses of hot chocolate, which we gratefully accepted during a quick break. It turned out that Patricia had been making life difficult for most of the neighborhood, and my Zamboni rebellion was striking a chord with people. "She fined us for having the wrong shade of white Christmas lights," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Apparently, they were too warm-toned and clashed with the cool white aesthetic she was going for. She made us remove a little free library from our front yard," added her husband. "Said it was not an approved structure." The stories kept coming, each more ridiculous than the last. Patricia had created an environment where people were afraid to personalize their homes or live normally, constantly worried about violating some obscure rule buried in the 100-page HOA handbook. By 3 in the morning, we had completed 16 driveways. Mine was last. Scott lined up the Zamboni with extra care, and I could not help but feel a surge of satisfaction as the machine erased every trace of my vehicle's passage, creating a surface so perfect it looked like it had never been touched. "Beautiful," Scott declared, shutting down the Zamboni. "That is some quality work." I handed him the $500, and he loaded the machine back onto the trailer. As he prepared to leave, he clasped my shoulder. "This was the most fun I have had in ages," he said. "You ever need a Zamboni again, you call me. I will keep that in mind." After Scott drove away, I stood in my driveway, admiring the smooth expanse of white. The whole street looked transformed, like something out of a winter fairy tale. Every driveway was immaculate, flawless, exactly what Patricia's violation notice had demanded. I went inside and slept better than I had in months. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of voices outside. Lots of voices. I looked out my window and saw neighbors standing in their driveways, examining the smooth surfaces with expressions of wonder and confusion. I grabbed my coffee and headed outside. "Frank," called Sandra Chen from across the street. "Did you do this?" "Do what?" I asked innocently. "The driveways. They are all perfect. What happened?" Before I could answer, I saw Patricia Henshaw's Mercedes turn onto our street. She drove slowly, her head swiveling back and forth as she took in the scene. Her car came to a stop in front of my house, and she got out, her face already red with what I assumed was fury. Patricia was exactly what you would picture for an HOA president gone drunk with power. She was in her mid-50s, with severely cut blonde hair that probably cost $300 to maintain, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit despite the snowy conditions, and carrying a leather portfolio that I knew contained her precious HOA documentation. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing at the driveways. "Good morning, Patricia," I said cheerfully. "Beautiful day, is not it? Do not play games with me, Frank. These driveways have been tampered with." "Tampered with? I would say they have been improved. Look how smooth they are." Not a single tire track visible. Her eyes narrowed. "You did this." "I simply complied with the HOA's standards. Your violation notice specifically stated that driveways should be smooth and free of tracks. I made sure every driveway on the street met that standard." "By doing what exactly?" "I hired a Zamboni." The neighbors who had gathered let out a collective laugh. Patricia's face went from red to purple. "A Zamboni? You brought a Zamboni into this neighborhood?" "It is a snow-smoothing machine, very effective. As you can see, the results speak for themselves." "This is vandalism." "How is it vandalism to improve my neighbor's properties at my own expense? I did not damage anything. I simply ensured compliance with HOA regulations." James Morrison stepped forward, his phone in hand. "Actually, Patricia, I have video of the whole thing." Frank did not damage anyone's property. He smoothed snow on driveways, which your own rules say should be smooth. Patricia rounded on him. "This is absurd. The rule is meant to prevent unsightly tire tracks, not to encourage bringing industrial machinery into a residential area." "The rule says driveways should be maintained in a visually pleasing manner and free from track marks," I countered, pulling out my own copy of the HOA handbook. I had done my homework. Section 12.4, subsection C, it does not specify how this should be accomplished. I chose the most effective method available. "You will be fined for this," Patricia sputtered. "For what?" "Following the rules." She opened her portfolio and started flipping through papers, clearly trying to find something, anything she could use against me. The neighbors watched with barely concealed amusement. This was clearly the most entertainment Maple Ridge Drive had seen in years. "Unauthorized commercial vehicle in a residential zone," Patricia finally declared. Section 8.2. You cannot have commercial vehicles in the neighborhood without prior approval. The Zamboni was only here for 3 hours in the middle of the night, and it was performing maintenance work, which Section 8.2 explicitly allows. I checked. I actually had checked. After deciding on this plan, I had read the entire HOA handbook, all 112 pages of it, highlighting every relevant section. Patricia had probably assumed no one would ever bother to read the whole thing, which gave her free rein to interpret rules however she wanted. But I had found every loophole, every exception, and every piece of language that could work in my favor. Patricia was visibly struggling. She was used to people backing down, to wielding the HOA rules as a weapon that no one could defend against. But I was not backing down, and I had the rules on my side. "This is not over," she finally said. "I am calling an emergency HOA board meeting. Your actions will be reviewed. Looking forward to it, I replied. She stormed back to her Mercedes and drove away, leaving the neighbors buzzing with excitement. That was incredible, Sandra said. I cannot believe you actually did it. Someone had to push back, I said. Patricia has been making everyone miserable for too long. Over the next few hours, word spread throughout the neighborhood. People I had never met before stopped by to thank me or to share their own Patricia horror stories. It turned out that Maple Ridge Drive was just one of several streets in Meadowbrook Heights, and Patricia's reign of terror extended throughout the entire community. Pool furniture had to be a specific shade of gray. Garden gnomes were forbidden. Holiday decorations could only be displayed during approved date ranges. The list went on. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. I spent the weekend preparing, gathering documentation, and talking to neighbors. What I discovered shocked me. Patricia had not just been overzealous. She had been actively violating HOA bylaws and Colorado state law regarding homeowners associations. For one thing, the HOA board was supposed to have 5 members. Currently, it had 3. Patricia as president, her friend Denise Walker as treasurer, and a guy named Bob Fletcher as secretary who, according to everyone I talked to, just rubber-stamped whatever Patricia wanted. The other 2 board positions had been vacant for over a year, and Patricia had made no effort to hold elections to fill them. Colorado law requires HOAs to hold annual elections and maintain a full board. Patricia had been operating with an incomplete board, which meant many of her decisions might not be legally valid. I also discovered that Patricia had been imposing fines that exceeded the amounts specified in the HOA bylaws. The bylaws stated that minor violations carried a maximum fine of $10. Patricia had been charging $20, $30, sometimes $50 for things like the wrong shade of curtains visible from the street. By the time Tuesday rolled around, I had a file folder full of documentation and a legal pad covered in notes. I also had something else, a petition signed by 43 homeowners, over 60% of the households in Meadowbrook Heights, requesting Patricia's removal as HOA president and calling for a full board election. The community center meeting room was packed when I arrived. Every chair was filled and people lined the walls. I had expected maybe a dozen concerned neighbors. Instead, it looked like the entire community had shown up. Patricia sat at the front table with Denise and Bob, looking far less confident than usual. "This meeting will come to order," Patricia said, banging a gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. "We are here to address the issue of Frank Quinlan's violation of community standards through his unauthorized use of snow removal equipment." "I would like to make a statement," I said, standing up. "You will have an opportunity to speak when called upon," Patricia replied curtly. "Actually, according to HOA bylaws, any homeowner can address the board at any time during an open meeting. Section 15.1. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I walked to the front and turned to face the crowd. Over the past week, I have spent time reviewing our HOA's bylaws, Colorado state law regarding homeowners associations, and the history of decisions made by this board. What I found is deeply troubling. I laid out everything I had discovered. The incomplete board, the excessive fines, the violations of state law, the arbitrary enforcement of rules. With each point, I provided documentation, citing specific bylaws and statutes. The room grew quieter and quieter as people realized the extent of Patricia's misconduct. "In conclusion," I said, I am formally requesting that Patricia Henshaw resign as HOA president, that the board hold immediate elections to fill vacant positions, and that all fines issued in excess of bylaw maximums be refunded to homeowners." The room erupted in applause. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking. "I have dedicated 5 years to this community. I have maintained standards and property values." "You have bullied people," called out Mrs. Peterson. "You have made us afraid to live in our own homes." "I second Frank's motion," said James Morrison. "All in favor." "This is not a vote," Patricia protested. "You cannot just vote me out." "Actually, we can," I said, pulling out another document. "According to our bylaws, a petition signed by 60% of homeowners can trigger a special election to replace any board member. I have 63%. I handed the petition to Bob Fletcher, who looked at it with wide eyes. He glanced at Patricia, then at the room full of angry homeowners and seemed to make a calculation. "The petition appears to be valid," Bob said quietly. "You cannot be serious," Patricia hissed at him. "I am sorry, Patricia, but this is clearly what the community wants." Denise Walker, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. "I think we should table this discussion and consult with a lawyer." "I already did," I said. "I spoke with an attorney who specializes in HOA law. She reviewed everything and confirmed that the petition is legally binding. Patricia can either resign voluntarily or we can proceed with a removal vote tonight. Either way, her term as president is over." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at Patricia. Her face cycled through several emotions: anger, denial, and finally something that might have been resignation. She gathered her papers, stuffed them into her portfolio, and stood. "Fine," she said coldly. "You want to run this community into the ground without proper standards. Be my guest." She walked out, Denise following uncertainly behind her. The room exploded into chatter. Bob Fletcher banged the gavel, looking slightly shell-shocked. "I suppose we need to elect a new board." The next hour was spent organizing an impromptu election. James Morrison was nominated and accepted the role of president. Sandra Chen agreed to be vice president. 3 other neighbors filled the remaining positions, creating a full 5-member board for the first time in years. One of the new board's first acts was to review all outstanding fines issued over the past year. They invalidated over 2/3 of them, including my tire track fine, and arranged for refunds to be issued to homeowners who had already paid excessive amounts. As the meeting wrapped up, James pulled me aside. "You know you should have run for president yourself, right?" "No thanks," I said. "I just wanted Patricia out. You will do a great job. We are going to need to rewrite a lot of the more ridiculous rules. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with." I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. The street was still covered in snow, though the Zamboni smoothed surfaces had accumulated footprints and tire tracks again. It looked like a normal neighborhood, lived in and real. But the story was not quite over. 2 days later, I was grading papers when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. "Frank Quinlan?" one of them asked. My stomach dropped. "Yes. We need to ask you some questions about Patricia Henshaw and the Meadowbrook Heights HOA." I invited them in, my mind racing. Had Patricia filed a complaint against me? Was bringing a Zamboni into the neighborhood actually illegal somehow? The officers sat in my living room, and the older one, Officer Martinez, pulled out a notebook. "We are investigating allegations of embezzlement. Your name came up in our inquiries." Embezzlement. Patricia Henshaw has been accused of misappropriating HOA funds. We understand you recently led an effort to remove her from the board. Relief washed over me. They were investigating Patricia, not me. Yes, but I did not know anything about embezzlement. What happened? Officer Martinez explained that after the board meeting, Bob Fletcher had gone through the HOA's financial records more carefully. He had discovered that, over the past 3 years, Patricia had been systematically siphoning money from the HOA's reserve fund. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here and there, but increasing over time. In total, she had stolen nearly $40,000. She was clever about it, Martinez said. She created fake invoices for maintenance work that was never done, paid the invoices to a shell company she controlled, and then deposited the money into her personal account. If you had not stirred things up, we might never have known. How did Bob figure it out? He started looking at the invoices after the meeting and noticed some inconsistencies. Companies billing for snow removal in July, that kind of thing. He brought it to the new board, they hired a forensic accountant, and the accountant found everything. Over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded. Patricia was arrested and charged with theft and embezzlement. The story made the local news, with reporters fascinated by the narrative of an HOA president brought down by a Zamboni. I declined most interview requests, but James Morrison spoke to the press, emphasizing that the community was moving forward and working to rebuild trust. The legal process took months. Patricia initially denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer eventually negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony theft, was sentenced to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, and was ordered to repay the $40,000 plus interest. Denise Walker, who had known about some of the financial irregularities but had not reported them, resigned from the board and moved out of Meadowbrook Heights. Bob Fletcher remained as secretary, working hard to redeem himself by being completely transparent about all HOA business. Meanwhile, the new board got to work transforming the community. The 100-page rule book was reduced to 15 pages of sensible guidelines. The approved paint color list expanded from 3 shades of beige to any neutral tone. Garden decorations were permitted as long as they were not offensive. Holiday lights could be any color and could stay up through the entire month of January if people wanted. Most importantly, the board established open office hours where homeowners could voice concerns, ask questions, or request changes to rules. The whole atmosphere of the neighborhood shifted. People started decorating more, personalizing their homes, actually living instead of tiptoeing around arbitrary regulations. I became something of a local legend, known as the guy who brought down a corrupt HOA president with a Zamboni. It was not exactly how I had planned to make my mark on the community, but I could not complain. The following winter, when the first significant snow of the season fell, I went outside to find a surprise on my driveway. Someone had arranged stones to spell out Zamboni Hero in the snow. I laughed and took a picture before getting in my car and driving to work, leaving perfectly normal tire tracks behind me. That evening I found a note in my mailbox. It was from Scott, the Zamboni operator. "Hey Frank," it read. "Saw the news about Patricia getting arrested. Glad the community is doing better. If you ever need another Zamboni run, first one's on me. You're a legend, Scott." I kept the note on my refrigerator. Life in Meadowbrook Heights gradually returned to normal, or rather, it became normal for the first time in years. Property values actually increased once word spread that the neighborhood was no longer run by a tyrannical HOA. People started moving in specifically because of the reasonable rules and active community involvement. James Morrison proved to be an excellent HOA president. He was fair, transparent, and genuinely interested in making the neighborhood a better place to live. Under his leadership, the board organized community events, summer barbecues, a Halloween decoration contest, a holiday lights display that raised money for local charities. One Saturday afternoon in spring, about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was working in my garden when Sandra Chen walked over with her daughter. "Frank, I want you to meet someone," Sandra said. "This is my daughter, Grace. She is doing a school project about people who stand up for what is right." Grace looked about 12, holding a tablet and wearing a serious expression. "Mr. Quinlan, can I interview you?" "Sure," I said, pulling off my gardening gloves. "What do you want to know?" "My teacher said you helped fix problems in our neighborhood. How did you know what to do?" I thought about it for a moment. "Honestly, Grace, I did not start out knowing what to do. I was just frustrated with being fined for something silly. But then I realized that if I was frustrated, other people probably were too. So I started talking to neighbors and reading the rules, really reading them instead of just assuming the HOA president knew what she was doing. And I found out that we had more power than we thought." "What made you use a Zamboni?" Grace asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. I grinned. "Well, I wanted to make a point. The HOA said my driveway had to be smooth, so I made it the smoothest driveway possible. Sometimes you have to be creative when you are solving problems." "Was it expensive?" "The Zamboni cost me about $800 total, but it was worth every penny. Sometimes you have to invest in making things right." Grace typed notes on her tablet. "Do you think you are a hero?" That question made me pause. "No, I do not think I am a hero. I just did what needed to be done. Real heroes are people like firefighters and doctors and teachers. I just brought a Zamboni to a neighborhood dispute." Sandra smiled. "I think you are being modest." "Maybe a little," I admitted. "But here is what I learned, Grace. Most problems seem bigger than they are because people feel powerless. Once you realize you have options, that you can push back against unfairness, things get easier. And when people work together, they can accomplish a lot." Grace finished her interview and thanked me. As I watched her and Sandra walk back to their house, I felt a sense of contentment. My divorce had pushed me to start over in a new place, and while Meadowbrook Heights had not been perfect at first, it had become a real home. That summer, the HOA organized its first annual community festival. There were food trucks, games for kids, a dunk tank, and live music. James Morrison gave a speech thanking everyone for their involvement and patience during the transition to the new board. Then he called me up to the small stage they had set up in the community park. "Frank Quinlan taught us something important," James said. "He taught us that we do not have to accept unfairness just because someone in authority says that is how things are." He stood up for himself and for all of us, and he did it with creativity, determination, and a really unusual choice of equipment. Everyone laughed. I felt my face getting hot. "So we have a little something for you," James continued. He pulled out a plaque that read, "Frank Quinlan, Meadowbrook Heights Citizen of the Year, in recognition of his service to the community and his innovative approach to problem solving." Below the text was an engraved image of a Zamboni. The crowd applauded and cheered. I took the plaque, genuinely moved. "Thank you," I managed to say into the microphone. "I just want to say that this community is special. Not because of perfect driveways or matching paint colors, but because of the people who live here. We all deserve to feel comfortable in our homes, to make them our own, and to live without fear of unreasonable rules. I am glad I could play a small part in making that happen." More applause. As I stepped off the stage, neighbors came up to shake my hand, thank me, or share updates about their lives. It felt good to be part of a community that actually functioned like a community should. Later that evening, as the sun set and families packed up their picnic blankets, I sat on a bench watching kids run around the playground. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Saw your plaque on Facebook. You're famous now." I typed back. "More like infamous." "Same thing." "Seriously though, proud of you, man. You turned a bad situation into something good." "Thanks. Want to come over for dinner next week?" "Absolutely. I want to hear all the details." I pocketed my phone and looked around the park. This was what a neighborhood should be. People enjoying each other's company. Kids playing safely. Families relaxing without worrying about violating some obscure regulation. It had taken a corrupt HOA president, $40,000 in embezzlement, and one very unusual snow smoothing operation to get here, but it was worth it. The following winter, when snow fell again, I had a thought. I called Scott. "Hey, it is Frank," I said when he answered. "The Zamboni legend, what is up? Remember how you said the first one would be on you?" "Yeah, why? You need another midnight run." "Not quite. I was thinking maybe we could do something different. The community center has an empty lot next to it. What if we flooded it, let it freeze, and then you could Zamboni it into a skating rink? The HOA has budget for it now, and I think the neighborhood would love it." Scott was quiet for a moment. "That is actually a really good idea. Let me look at the specs, but yeah, I think we could do that. Get me the measurements and I will put together a proposal." 6 weeks later, Meadowbrook Heights had its own ice skating rink. It was not huge, maybe 40 feet by 60 feet, but it was perfect. Scott came every few days to maintain the ice, and the HOA organized skating parties and lessons. Kids learned to skate. Adults rediscovered childhood joy. The rink became the heart of the community during winter months. And every time Scott showed up with his Zamboni, people waved and smiled, remembering the machine's role in liberating the neighborhood from tyranny. I eventually started dating again, meeting a woman named Grace Emerson at a neighborhood potluck. She was a graphic designer who had moved to Meadowbrook Heights specifically because she had read about the HOA reform and wanted to live somewhere with reasonable regulations. "I was so tired of HOAs that fined me for having flowers that were the wrong color," she explained over coffee on our first date. "When I read that this neighborhood had gone through a big change, I knew I had to check it out." "Well, I am glad you did," I said. Grace and I took things slow, but it felt right. She appreciated my sense of humor and my willingness to stand up for what was right. I appreciated her creativity and her optimism. We spent winter evenings skating at the community rink, holding hands as we glided across ice smoothed by the same type of machine that had started everything. One evening, about a year after Patricia's sentencing, Grace and I were walking back from the rink when we saw someone standing in front of my house. As we got closer, I realized it was Patricia. She looked different. Older, thinner, wearing plain clothes instead of her usual designer outfits. She had been released early on parole, and apparently she had come back to the neighborhood. "Frank," she said as I approached. "Can we talk?" I glanced at Grace, who squeezed my hand but stayed quiet. "What do you want, Patricia?" I wanted to apologize. She looked down at her feet. "I spent a lot of time in prison thinking about what I did. To the community, to you, to everyone. I was so obsessed with control and perfection that I forgot these were people's homes. I forgot that rules should serve the community, not the other way around." I studied her face. She looked genuine, but I was wary. "Why tell me this?" "Because you were the one who had the courage to stand up to me. Everyone else was afraid, but you pushed back. And you were right. I was wrong about everything." We stood in silence for a moment. I could feel anger bubbling up, remembering all the stress and frustration she had caused, but I also saw a broken woman trying to make amends. "I accept your apology," I said finally. But you hurt a lot of people, Patricia. It is going to take more than words to make that right. I know. I am meeting with a therapist. I am working on paying back the money. I am trying to be better. She took a shaky breath. I just wanted you to know that what you did, standing up to me, it actually helped me in the long run. I needed someone to stop me before I destroyed my whole life. You destroyed your own life, I said, but not unkindly. But I am glad you are working on rebuilding it. Patricia nodded and walked away. Grace and I watched her go. That must have been hard for her, Grace said. Yeah, but necessary. We went inside, and I hung my coat by the door, glancing at the plaque on my wall. The Zamboni image always made me smile. Life continued to improve in Meadowbrook Heights. The community became known throughout Boulder County as an example of how an HOA should function. Other neighborhoods reached out to James Morrison for advice on reforming their own associations. He always gave the same advice. Listen to your residents, keep rules reasonable, and remember that people should be able to enjoy their homes. I continued teaching, finding new joy in my work now that my home life was stable and happy. My students still teased me about being the Zamboni guy, especially after a local news station did an anniversary story about Patricia's arrest and the community's transformation. Grace and I got more serious, and eventually she moved into my house. We talked about marriage but decided we were happy as we were. She set up a home office in the spare bedroom and started taking on bigger design clients. I supported her ambitions the same way she supported mine. The neighborhood kids loved Grace. She organized art projects and taught design basics to anyone interested. The community center's walls soon featured rotating displays of local artwork, adding color and personality to the space. 3 years after the Zamboni incident, James Morrison decided to step down as HOA president. He had done an incredible job, but he was ready to focus more on his law practice and spend time with his grandchildren. At the election meeting, several people nominated me. I initially declined, but Grace nudged me. You would be good at it, she whispered. I really do not want to be HOA president, I whispered back. Then nominate someone else, but make sure it is someone good. I looked around the room and saw Sarah Jenkins, a retired project manager who had moved to the neighborhood 2 years earlier. She was organized, fair, and genuinely liked by everyone. I nominated her, and she was elected unanimously. Sarah proved to be exactly what the community needed. She continued James's policies while adding her own touches, like a neighborhood newsletter and a system for organizing volunteers for community projects. One day, about 4 years after everything started, I received an email from a news producer in Denver. They were doing a segment about people who had made a difference in their communities and wanted to interview me. I really would rather not, I told Grace. It was so long ago. It is a good story, though, and maybe it will inspire other people who are dealing with unfair HOA situations. She had a point. I agreed to the interview. The reporter, a young woman named Ashley Chen, came to my house with a camera crew. We sat in my living room while she asked questions about the tire track fine, the decision to hire a Zamboni, and everything that followed. What would you say to someone who is dealing with an unfair HOA right now? Ashley asked. I thought about it carefully. First, know your rights. Read the bylaws, check state laws, understand what the HOA can and cannot do. Second, talk to your neighbors. You are probably not the only one who is frustrated. Third, be creative. Sometimes the best way to make a point is to do something unexpected. And fourth, do not be afraid to stand up for what is right. Change is possible, but someone has to be willing to push for it. The segment aired a few weeks later during the evening news. My phone exploded with messages from friends, former students, and even people I had not talked to in years. The story resonated with people far beyond Meadowbrook Heights. I received emails from homeowners across the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to share their stories. I tried to respond to as many as I could, offering whatever guidance I could based on my experience. One email stood out. It was from a man in Florida who was being fined for having the wrong type of grass in his yard. He had read about my story and decided to push back against his HOA. He researched the bylaws, found inconsistencies in how rules were being enforced, and organized his neighbors. 3 months later, he wrote to tell me that they had successfully recalled their HOA board and elected new leadership. "Your story inspired us to take action," he wrote. "Thank you for showing that ordinary people can make a difference." Those kinds of messages made everything worthwhile. 5 years after the Zamboni incident, Meadowbrook Heights celebrated its 20th anniversary as a community. The HOA organized a big festival with food, music, and activities. As part of the celebration, Sarah Jenkins announced that the skating rink would be permanently named the Quinlan Community Ice Rink. "Frank Quinlan brought our community together," Sarah said during the ceremony. "His creativity, courage, and commitment to fairness transformed Meadowbrook Heights into the wonderful place it is today. This rink, which has brought so much joy to our families, will forever bear his name." I was genuinely touched. Grace stood beside me, squeezing my hand as everyone applauded. The plaque dedicating the rink was unveiled, featuring my name and, naturally, an image of a Zamboni. Later that day, as I skated with Grace under strings of lights, I reflected on how strange and wonderful life could be. A simple tire track fine had set off a chain of events that had changed my life and the lives of everyone in the neighborhood. Patricia was out of prison, apparently doing well working at a nonprofit and staying out of trouble. Bob Fletcher had become a good friend, often joining Grace and me for dinner. The neighborhood was thriving, property values had increased, and most importantly, people were happy. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked as we glided across the ice. "Just how weird it is that a Zamboni changed my life," she laughed. "You changed your life. The Zamboni was just the tool you used. Maybe, but it was a really good tool." We skated until the rink closed, then walked home hand in hand through the quiet streets. Lights glowed in windows. Snow crunched under our feet. Someone had built a snowman in their yard, and it was wearing a scarf in a truly hideous shade of orange that would have given Patricia a heart attack. I loved it. Inside our house, I made hot chocolate while Grace started a fire in the fireplace. We settled on the couch, warm and content. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Going to war with the HOA? Not for a second. It needed to happen. Someone had to do it." "I am glad it was you." "Me too." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. My phone buzzed with another message from someone asking for HOA advice. I would answer it tomorrow. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy being home, in a neighborhood that had become everything I had hoped for when I first moved here. The next morning, I woke to find fresh snow had fallen overnight. My driveway was covered in a pristine white blanket. I made coffee, pulled on boots and a jacket, and went outside to start my car. The tires left clear tracks in the snow as I backed out. I paused at the end of the driveway, looking at those tracks. They were just tracks, normal and unavoidable. But they also represented something bigger. The right to live normally, to use your property without fear, to exist without constantly worrying about arbitrary rules. No violation notice would appear in my mailbox. No fine would be assessed. The tracks would remain until the next snowfall, or until I felt like shoveling, whichever came first. That was freedom. I drove to work, ready to face another day of teaching teenagers about mathematical concepts they thought they would never use. But I would also teach them, through example and occasional stories, that standing up for what is right matters, that creativity can solve problems, that one person really can make a difference, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the solution to your problem is a Zamboni. As the years passed, my story became part of local legend. New residents moving into Meadowbrook Heights would hear about the guy who hired a Zamboni to fight the HOA, and they would ask if it was true. Current residents would laugh and point to my house, and I would wave from my yard where I was planting flowers in unapproved colors. The community continued to thrive. The ice rink became a beloved institution. The HOA remained functional and fair, with engaged residents who actually read the bylaws and participated in decisions. Patricia's story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. I never forgot the lesson I had learned. Power unchallenged becomes tyranny, but people working together can always create change. It just takes one person willing to take the first step, even if that step involves an extremely unconventional snow removal machine. And somewhere in Denver, Scott still operated his Zamboni at the Riverside Ice Arena, probably telling the story of the time he helped take down a corrupt HOA president. I imagine he smiled every time he told it. I know I did. The tire tracks in my driveway faded with time and weather, but the impact of standing up for what was right never did. That was the real story, not the Zamboni, not the fines, not even Patricia's arrest. The real story was about a community that found its voice and used it to create something better. And it all started with $20 and some tracks in the snow.